chosen to go first. So here is a story for all of y'all. I hope it carries well. Uh, so a while like this was probably like 20, 30 years back. This didn't happen to me personally. Uh, but one night my uncle was walking down. He lives out in the boonies, the countries. And one day he was walking out down a dirt road, and he came across this guy who was also just walking down the road, and he didn't recognize him. Close town, people really know each other. Uh, and the guy looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at the guy, and the dude just looked like super scared of my uncle, and so my uncle's like, I'm gonna keep my distance between this dude. And so they keep on walking, down the same, they keep going in the same direction, and it's starting to get dark. And again, the guy looks back at my uncle, and my uncle, they just kind of looking at each other, and the man just he's freaking out, he is super scared. He looks freaked out, and so my uncle, of course, you see a guy who's scared, and you're gonna be scared of that guy, and so they they get a little they pick up their pace a little bit, and they keep walking, and they get to this big section of the woods, and it was getting super dark, and again they look at each other, and the guy's just he's dripping sweat, he's freaking out, just he's turning white, essentially, something's wrong with this dude. And so at this point, my uncle's freaking out, but he's also I'm still on my way home, but I also kind of care for this dude. And so they keep walking, and they're in the woods at this point. And so they're walking, and again, at the end of they get to the end of the path, and they look at each other, and my uncle turns to the guy to ask him a question, and the dude is freaking out at this point, and he goes, "Ah!" That's not a real story, but I hope you enjoy it.
Well, I've got a story to tell you. My uncle one day had a bright idea of taking a shower. Instead of drying off with a towel, oh no, what'd he do? He air dried himself by walking down a trail in the middle of the city, while parents and kids were screaming and running for cover. He decided he was going to duck behind some trees and just kind of wait it out a little bit. And then he heard some ruffling. He was thinking, what in the hell is going on? What's all this ruffling all about? He looked around a little bit longer, couldn't see nobody. Then all of a sudden, someone jumped out and said, boo.
Okay guys, I'm gonna try my best. So this story it didn't happen to me, but it happened around 30 years ago. It happened to my uncle. So this story started on a very dark night. The moon was in the middle of the sky. Some birds were chirping far away, and my uncle was walking down a lone road back to his house. His house was in the middle of a forest. So he was walking alone in a dark road at night, when suddenly he sees that next to him, close by on the road, is another man walking by, and he looks at him and he gets scared. He goes, "Wow, there's another person walking with me at night." So this was a pretty scary realization for him. So nonetheless, he took some distance and kept on walking through the night. He kept walking from around, back to his house in the woods, and this man was still there with him. So I kind of scared him a little bit more and more, and this path, since his house was in the woods, they had to start getting into the woods. So as they got into the woods, they both were running in the same path. and he was pretty scared about this. He was wondering very, very strange about this. So while he was walking, he looked at the other man, and he was sweating, and he seemed really scared about the situation as well. So they were both walking, and as they got closer and closer to the house, they, when he was right in front of the house, they both locked their eyes and looked at each other, and the man scared his face out. And yeah, that's the end of the story. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm going to tell you this story. And first of all, you have to know it didn't happen to me. It happened about 30 years ago to my uncle. And so it was this one night. My uncle was outside. He had to go home. And the moon was in the middle of the sky. And you could hear the birds chirping. And it was a beautiful night. And he had to go. There was the path was like through this big forest, or around this big forest to get to his house. And so he started walking. And as he was walking, because he could see, because the moon was shining so bright, he looked, and there on the path was another man. And he was surprised because usually there was not another person walking around. He did not know this man. And so, but he kept walking. And he was walking down this path at night, and he had to go for a long time. It was like a big wood. They had to go around. And he kept looking, and the man was still like keeping up with him and walking along, and it was just very strange. And he wasn't really scared, but he was curious. Curious. And so they keep walking and walking. This man is still with them, and now they're going a little bit faster, because now he is getting a little bit uneasy. And he's starting to sweat a little bit, and he's looking, the other man is sweating too, which is just strange and also uncomfortable. And then they get to where he's right in front of his house, and he doesn't know what to do. My uncle just didn't know what to do. And he stopped, and he looked at the man, and the man looked at him and went, "Ah!" And that's it.
Okay, so this happened 30 years ago. Didn't happen to me, it happened to my uncle. I was outside. He had to go home. The moon was in the mid-sky. There were birds chirping. He had to go through this forest on a path to get to his house. Moon shining bright. He's on the path. He notices there's this other guy that's there, and he's usually by himself. So he didn't know this guy. So he's not, he had to walk for a long time. He kept looking. The guy was there keeping up with him, and he's like, usually he's by himself. He's not freaked out, but he's a little bit curious. He starts sweating, and kind of starts to feel a little bit uneasy. He noticed the guy starts sweating. He thinks that's kind of weird too. So they're both sweating, keeping up with each other, and so finally they're in front of my uncle's house, and my uncle doesn't know what to do. So he's just like, they're just kind of looking at each other, and all of a sudden the guy just goes, "Bah!" That's it. End story.
Okay, so this happened about 30 years ago. It didn't happen to me. It happened to someone else. It was my uncle. He was about to leave. It was already nighttime. He was about to leave, and he had to take this path through the woods, like a forest or something, to get there. And it was like nighttime. It was birds chirping. It was the moon was out. So he starts walking, and he notices a guy. He's always alone. He notices a guy. So he sees him, and he just keeps on going. And then the guy kind of like starts going too. So he's kind of getting a little bit nervous. He starts sweating, and then noticed the other guy started sweating, which is kind of weird. So finally they end up in front of my uncle's house, and he's a little worried, freaked out. He looks over at him, and the guy just goes, "Bah!" And that was it. That's the story.
Okay, so this is a story about my uncle, and it happened about 30 years ago. So my uncle, he liked to go out at night, and one night he went out to take a walk. It was a little after 9, it was dark, there were birds chirping, there was a big moon, and so he was walking, and he ended up walking through a forest. So he's going along this forest path, and usually he's by himself, but he felt like and heard there was somebody behind him following him. He didn't think much of it, place he'd gone before, so he's walking down this path, and he's walking, and he continues to feel and hear this person behind him. And my uncle is going along this path, and all of a sudden he starts sweating. He gets sweaty. And he notices that the guy that's following him is getting really sweaty too. And so they keep going down the path, they keep walking along, and then finally, my uncle gets to his house. And by this time, he's really freaking out. This guy's really freaking him out. He's been following him through the forest. The moon's still out, so he's got a pretty good view. And he turns around and he looks at the guy, and the guy goes, "Bah!" That's it.
All right, so this is a story about my uncle. And my uncle liked to walk. He liked to take walks at night. And he was walking down, he liked to walk in the forest or something. And he's like enjoying a midnight stroll in the forest. And it's like a full moon, so it's pretty well lit, but as he's enjoying the walk, he's taking in the sounds of the night creatures, and he starts to feel someone behind him, and he's like, "Oh, that's weird," but he keeps going. He's like, "Ah, it's nothing." But then as he keeps going, he feels it more and more, and he's like, "Oh, this is freaking me out." And so he goes a little bit faster, and he's starting to get real sweaty and nervous because someone is following him. And he feels like someone's following him, and then he notices that the guy behind him is getting sweaty and nervous too. And then he gets all the way back home through the trails in this forest next to his house. And he gets right up to the front door, and he's like, "All right, this is it. I gotta look at this guy. I gotta see who the hell is following me right now, because this is spooking me out, real creepy." And so he turns around, and then the guy goes, "Boo!" That's it.
All right, so I'm gonna tell you a story about my uncle. So my uncle was this guy, kind of weird guy, and he liked to go walking, and he liked to take walks at night. So one night he was telling me he went for a walk in the forest, and it was kind of a beautiful night, quiet, could hear like the sounds, of the forest. The moonlight was shining down like beautifully, kind of like illuminating his path. So he was having a really great walk, and then he heard like this noise behind him, and he was like, what the fuck is that? And he like looked behind him, and he didn't see anybody, and okay, all right, and he kept walking. He's a positive guy, and so he kept walking, and again he heard like a noise behind him, and he's like, what the fuck is that? And he didn't see anything, he didn't know what was going on, so he like kept walking, kind of hurried up and was getting closer and closer and closer to the house. He was getting nearer to being back home, and he heard it again. He like knew somebody was behind him, so he like looked behind him again, and like there was a guy, and the guy goes, "Boo!" That's the story.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you a story about my uncle. So my uncle was kind of a weird guy, and he really liked to take walks. And so one night, he decided to go take a walk in the woods. So he was out walking in the woods, and it's a beautiful night, and the moonlight's coming down, and there's nice breeze in the trees, and it's just really nice and pretty. But he hears this weird sound behind him. And so he turns, and he didn't see anything, but he just knew there was somebody behind him. So he just keeps walking, and then he hears it again. And so he stops, and he turns, and he looks, and he doesn't see anything, but he was just sure that somebody was behind him. So he starts walking faster, and so he's getting closer to home, and he said, he's like, what the fuck is that behind me? I just know there's somebody behind me. So he hears the noise again, and he turns, and there's a man there, and the man goes, boom! So that's the story.
I'm going to tell you a story today about my uncle. One time, my uncle was walking in the forest on a beautiful sunny day. And he was walking along the path, and it was beautiful as the trees were in bloom and flowers were raining down, showering him with pollen and luscious scents and whimsical feelings. And he's walking along, and all of a sudden he hears this noise from behind, an ominous sound that makes him turn around, and nothing was there. So he kept along the path on the way home, walking along, smelling the lovely flowers, and then another noise creeping up behind him. He turns around, and then a man goes, boo! And that's the story.
So, I'm here to tell you a story about my uncle. One day, my uncle, he was getting out of the shower, and he was like, it looks nice out. I'm gonna go air dry on the trail. So he heads out to the trail. He's walking. He's feeling the breeze. Kids are crying. Parents are screaming. So he starts walking a little quicker towards down the trail where no one is around. So he's walking, and he hears like this ruffle. And he's like, what the fuck? What is this? Like, whatever, I'm just gonna keep going, I'm just gonna keep walking, I'm just gonna keep going. So he hears more ruffling. He hears more just scuffling and ruffling. And he turns around, a guy comes out, it's like, boom. And yeah, that's it.
Well, I've got to start to tell you. My uncle one day had a bright idea taking a shower. Instead of drying off with a towel, oh no, what'd he do? He air dried himself by walking down a trail in the middle of the city. While parents and kids were screaming and running for cover. He decided he was gonna duck behind some trees and just kind of wait it out a little bit. And then he heard some ruffling. He was thinking, what in the hell is going on? What's all this ruffling all about? He'd look around a little bit longer, couldn't see nobody. Then all of a sudden, someone jumped out and said, boo.